They lied to Caitlin Clark. And then Stephanie White has to explain herself after she almost cost them the game. Watch this. Look at Caitlin Clark. Her hands up. What the heck happened? Kelsey Mitchell drops the pass. She knows they messed up. But look at this. She is going to muster up some words and try to explain why she changed the play to get Kelsey Mitchell the ball. Caitlin Clark, look at her face. She's lost all hope, all faith in Stephanie White. She said no. You know the play.
It's getting really weird now. It's weird, it's strange, it's stupid.
And before it actually does, where the players on the floor know exactly what the play is, the coaches on the bench know exactly what the play is, and the 15,000 people in the building are all leaning forward because they know what's coming too. Indiana had one of those moments, and then somebody changed the plan. What happened in the final seconds of that fever game is the kind of...
Bro, Caitlin Clark is wide open right here. She's coming wide open. Y'all just ran this inbound play. Throw the ball into Caitlin Clark, but you want to force it to Kelsey Mitchell, and look what happened.
Thing that gets buried under highlights and box scores and post-game quotes about heart and effort and team basketball. It gets dressed up in coach speak and filed away under tough night, and most people move on by the next morning. But if you actually slow it down, if you actually watch the film, if you actually pay attention to what was happening on that floor, not just the play itself, but the faces, the body language, the split-second reactions of people who thought they knew exactly what was coming, a completely different story emerges. And that story starts with Caitlin Clark checking back into the game.
Caitlin Clark, her hands up. What the heck happened? Kelsey Mitchell drops the pass. She knows they messed up.
Let's set the scene first because context matters here. The Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky are locked into one of those late-game situations where every possession feels like it has its own heartbeat. The clock is not your friend. The margin for error has basically evaporated. This is the part of the game where preparation takes over, where all those hours in the gym, all those walkthroughs, all those moments of running the same play over and over until it becomes second nature, are supposed to pay off. Indiana needed a basket, or they needed to get to the free throw line. Simple as that, not complicated, not some elaborate multi-layered tactical puzzle. Just execute, get the points, and close the game out. They had just run an inbound play. It worked. The design was clean, the execution was there, and it gave Indiana exactly what they needed in that moment. So when Caitlin Clark checked back in, the reasonable assumption, the logical assumption, the assumption that the entire Indiana Fever organization
was open, she makes the free throws, game is over. Game is over. Y'all try to force it to Kelsey Mitchell. It goes off her leg. Now she's... You crediting Kelsey Mitchell when she did this.
See that Caitlin Clark has lost all faith in Stephanie White and her play calling.
Look at it.
She lied to her. She checked in the game as the same play. Same play as last time.
Caitlin Clark certainly thought so. You could see it in how she positioned herself. You could see it in her footwork. When you have run a play enough times, your body starts to remember it before your brain even consciously processes it. Elite athletes call it muscle memory, but it's really just the product of hours and hours of repetition turning into instinct. Clark came off that screen moving with a kind of purpose that only comes from knowing exactly where you're supposed to be and exactly what you're supposed to do when you get there. She was ready, she was open, she was in position, and then the ball went somewhere else. Watch Kelsey Mitchell in that moment. Watch her face when she realizes what's happening. Because Mitchell is a veteran, she's been around long enough to know when something is off, and in that moment something was very off. The ball came to her in a spot she wasn't quite set for, on a play that had clearly been adjusted at the last second, and the result was one of those painful, stomach-dropping turnovers that feel almost inevitable in hindsight, the ball coming off her leg, Chicago picking it up, and suddenly a game that Indiana should have been closing out was very much not closed out. Tie game, overtime. Now here's what I want you to think about, not the turnover itself. Turnovers happen, players make mistakes, basketball is a messy, human sport, and nobody bats 1,000. What I want you to think about is the decision that created the conditions for that turnover to happen. Somewhere between the last possession and that final inbound, somebody decided to change the play.
Game is over. Game is over. Y'all try to force it to Kelsey Mitchell. It goes off her leg. Now she's... You crediting Kelsey Mitchell when she did this.
Somebody decided that the approach that had just worked, the design that had just been executed cleanly, the play that had Caitlin Clark as the primary option needed to be adjusted. And in the process of making that adjustment, Caitlin Clark, the player who was wide open, the player who had literally just run the same play, the player who had the footwork and the positioning and the read was taken out of the equation. Let me be really clear about something here because this is where it matters. Caitlin Clark was wide open, not kind of open, not technically available if the defense shifted. wide, open, unmarked, standing in a spot on the floor where, if the ball had found her, the most likely outcome was 2 free throws, a clock that runs out, and an Indiana win that doesn't require overtime. That was the available outcome. That was the play as designed, and it didn't happen. Now I want to be fair here, because fairness is how you actually understand what's going on instead of just reacting to it. Coaches make adjustments. That's not a controversial statement, it's just true. Basketball is not a scripted sport.
I think I said this when C was drafted here. It's like when you have the bookends, when you have a point guard, and you have a center that are special. You can build a team around that, and certainly then you add in Kelsey, who had already been here, and she had a quiet 19.
Defenses move, reads change, situations develop in real time, and sometimes what looked like the right call 30 seconds ago no longer looks like the right call. Any coach worth their salary is constantly processing information and making decisions based on what they're seeing in the moment. So the first question you have to ask is, what did Stephanie White see that made her change the play? Because if the defense had taken away the Clark option, if there was coverage on her that made the original read unavailable, then you adjust. That's basketball. You take what the defense gives you. If the design had to change because the circumstances demanded it, that's a coaching decision you can evaluate and potentially defend. But here's the thing. Clark was open. If the defense had taken her away, she wouldn't have been standing there unmarked. If the coverage had shifted to make the original play unavailable, there would have been a defender on the most dangerous offensive player on the Indiana Fever. There wasn't.
Now Caitlin Clark bailed you out again, you and Kelsey Mitchell, but for whatever reason, you want to keep trying to credit Kelsey Mitchell at the podium. And once again in the locker room, do y'all think Stephanie White gave Caitlin Clark any credit? Absolutely not.
Which means the decision to deviate from the original play was not a response to what the defense was doing. It was something else. And that something else is what makes this story complicated. Let's talk about Caitlin Clark's face for a second, because this is one of those moments where the most important information isn't in the stat sheet or the box score or the final score. It's in the completely involuntary, completely unguarded reaction of a person processing something unexpected in real time. There's a flicker, a split second where her brain is clearly running through what just happened, trying to reconcile the play she prepared for with the play that was actually called. Her hands go up, not in frustration exactly, but in that universal human gesture that basically translates to, wait, what just happened? That is not the reaction of someone who was consulted. That is not the reaction of someone who knew the adjustment was coming. That is not the body language of a player who was part of the decision. That is someone who just got surprised in the worst possible moment, not by the defense, not by something unpredictable on the floor, but by the people on her own sideline. She's a professional. She adjusts instantly. That's what elite competitors do. They don't get to stand around processing their feelings when the clock is still running, but you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Then the game goes to overtime. Indiana actually wins. Caitlin Clark, to absolutely nobody's surprise, is a major reason why. She ends up with a 30-point double-double, 7 rebounds, the kind of performance that on most nights in most situations leads the post-game conversation and anchors the highlight reel and gets the franchise player the recognition she clearly earned. But here's what Stephanie White said at the podium. She talked about Kelsey Mitchell. A quiet 19 points from Mitchell, she said. Talked about how valuable she is, how important she is to the team, what a weapon she represents alongside the other pieces Indiana has built around her. Good things, true things, probably in the broader context of the roster. Kelsey Mitchell is a real player and a real contributor, and nobody needs to take that away from her. But Kelsey Mitchell is also the player whose leg the ball came off of. Kelsey Mitchell is also the player who is on the receiving end of a last-second play change that nearly cost Indiana the game. And Kelsey Mitchell getting the flowers at the post-game podium while Caitlin Clark's 30-point double-double sits there without a single specific mention is a choice. It's a choice that, on its own, you might be able to explain away. Coaches don't always structure their post-game comments the way fans would want them to. Press conferences are awkward, sound bites are imperfect, and sometimes things don't come out the way you intended, except this isn't the first time, and that's the part that makes it land differently. There's a pattern here that the Indiana Fever fanbase has been talking about all season in different forms, around different moments, but always circling back to the same underlying dynamic. When things go wrong, Caitlin Clark absorbs it, the criticism, the questions, the implication that something she did or didn't do is connected to the outcome. And when things go right, the credit gets distributed in ways that somehow consistently manage to leave her at the edges of the conversation rather than at the center of it. Now, maybe that's unintentional. Maybe it's just an awkward series of coincidences that keeps producing the same result. Maybe the coaching staff genuinely doesn't see the pattern because they're too close to it. That's possible. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know what's in anyone's head, but I can tell you what the film shows. I can tell you what happened on that floor. And I can tell you that what happened on that floor, a last-second play change away from the open player, a turnover and overtime that shouldn't have been necessary, and then a post-game narrative that centered the player who nearly gave the game away, is visible, documented, and difficult to explain with any reading that flatters the decision-making in that building. Here's the part that really sticks with me, though. Caitlin Clark didn't say anything, not a word, not a shade. Not a raised eyebrow in a press conference that anyone could screenshot and turn into a story. She sat there, she answered her questions, she was composed and professional and said exactly the right things, and she gave absolutely nobody anything they could use against her. That kind of restraint is hard. Genuinely hard, especially for someone who had just spent the last several seconds of regulation standing there open, watching the play go somewhere else, watching the ball come off someone's leg, watching a game she should have closed. Her professionalism, her relationships in that locker room, her ability to keep showing up and competing at the highest level regardless of what is happening around her. She is choosing every single day to be bigger than the situation, and that is a genuinely remarkable thing to watch, but it doesn't mean the situation isn't real. The Indiana Fever have something most franchises in the WNBA, most franchises in any league, would do almost anything to have. They have a player who has changed the conversation around women's basketball in a way that hasn't happened in a very long time. A player who sells tickets and moves merchandise and brings new eyeballs to the sport and makes the entire ecosystem bigger just by being in it. And with that comes responsibility. Not just responsibility to put her in a good position to succeed, though that player who has already run the exact same play, already proven she can execute, already standing open with no one on her. That's the moment. That's where you find out what an organization actually believes. Indiana found out something about themselves in those final seconds. The question is whether they're honest enough to look at it clearly. Here's where we land. The play was changed. Caitlin Clark was open. The ball went off someone else's leg. The game went to overtime, and the post-game narrative gave the credit to the player whose mistake nearly cost them the win. That's the complete story, not the version that gets softened for a game recap. Not the version that gets processed through coach speak and distributed talking points. The version that's sitting there in the film, visible to anyone who wants to look at it honestly. Caitlin Clark kept playing, she kept competing. She got her 30 points in her double-double, and she did what she always does, which is show up and perform at a level that frankly demands better from the people around her. And somewhere in that Fever building, there are questions that deserve real answers. Not press conference answers changed, about why the open player didn't get the ball, about what the post-game narrative was actually designed to communicate and to whom. She has earned the truth, possession by possession, game by game, all season long, and we're not looking away until someone in that building tells it.